Friends, I welcome you all to the Kiran Museum of Art for this special evening. Special it is, for this is a rare opportunity to listen to Ranbir Kaleka, who prefers to put his thoughts, feelings, experiences, soliloquies into his work, and firmly believes that art, like life, is a slow revelation. I'm happy to have convinced him to share with us through his talk how crossing germinated and grew as an idea, but also about how his imaginative vision has shaped through his formative years. Crossings has had an overwhelming response at KNMA from the art fraternity, college students and school kids. And some of the responses evoked terms such as magical, fantabulous, eerie, ambiguous, dreamy and complex. Demanding time and attention, viewers found themselves challenged by 4 projections, with their attention drawn to a happening within many happenings in a single frame and across the 4 canvases. In the 15-minute loop, images keep moving and moments keep unfolding, rupturing notions of a fixed time and place, oscillating between terrains of memory and imagination. Ranbir seems to enjoy the meandering quality in art, never going linear, always crisscrossing, superimposing, layering, digging deep into memory and his personal archives. His work addresses time, stories, memories, digging deeper within the self to excavate clairvoyant moments, experiences, and unprocessed emotions. I'm reminded here of an interesting discussion between Chris Durkin and Hans Ulrich, where Durkin talks about a book by Matteo Ricci, an Italian Jesuit priest, who propounds that memory system, life, environment, libraries should be treated like a house, which has rooms and staircases that take you from one room to the other, where you imagine a wall for your books or a shelf between the passages. Further to this, Durkin talks about neurosurgeons today believe that memory structures behave not like storage spaces, but rather like an elevator, not where you have things, but where you move in between things. Ranbir's work invokes those in-between spaces and in-between states of being, which personally I find most fascinating in his work. Questions of context, politics, social engagement do not make a direct entry into his work. He says, and I quote, "Things take time to sink in and to transform into the realm of art making, but my primary concern is to address and touch upon what it is to be human and to feel human." I found the person, artist Ranbir, quite intriguing too. Shy, calm, and always a gentleman in demeanor, but his work is nothing like that, as it reveals storms, tornadoes, energies, and forever a restless spirit. That Ranbir was born in Patiala, studied first at Chandigarh and then at Royal College of Art in London, and lived there for many years are all well-known facts. I hope the talk today will bring to fore unknown facts and aspects of the artist and his work. May I request Ranbir to make his presentation titled Skins of Time. Thank you.
Very happy to be amongst you today. Thank you, Mrs. Nadar, Rubina, and the KNMA team. Well, I thought I would find it simplest to start with the very beginning, or I could begin by saying that I find it enormously difficult to talk about my artworks, but one could then talk about where do these artworks come from, and why is it difficult for me to talk about them. Maybe I will begin with that, why it's difficult. I do take long before even beginning to start work on an idea. And how these ideas come to me, they come as events. And so I live with that event in my head. And I try to get hold of that, it's sort of diffuse. But as it comes clearer, if it becomes very clear, if it becomes something which I can get hold of completely. And if I can understand it completely, then I don't work on it. It doesn't interest me anymore. And then I wait for something else to happen to me. By that I mean another event coming to me on which I could work. So if there's a point where, yes, there is, the diffused event gets clearer, and then it begins to read in many different ways. And what I want to do is, if I can retain different readings, and how those readings are, if one says that they're sort of, I relate to it at that point in a non-verbal way. I try to feel the event. And that's what I meant. When I'm feeling that event, if it becomes totally comprehensible to me, that's when my interest in it absolutely stops. But when it begins to intrigue me and becomes stronger, but also very real at the same time, and becomes meaningful to me, and it seems that this is something which has been part of a real experience, and it is meaningful in a way that it speaks or feels truthful to me, then I begin to work on it. So, in a way, I reduce the work to a point where I can think about it as if I could say with my body. And because that's how I begin to work on it, that's what makes it very difficult to talk about it. But okay, so we'll come back to that again later in the talk. This is the house where I grew up, my first 5 years, and those first 5 years are very, very crucial to how my imagination, how I look at the world today is formed. Now, this is a collage of the house, and collage for the very reason because there is no returning to it. It's not a space for nostalgia, but it's just a space which gave me so much. It gave me how I make my artworks, how I think about space, and how I think about time. Now, this was a very sheltered life. It was a very large house. Parts of it were about 300 years old. And when these photographs were taken, parts of it had already crumbled. There were just two of us children in the house, my older brother and myself, and we spent a lot of time by ourselves. And then there was my grandmother, my father and his two younger brothers, and my mother, of course. And one thing which I think I've spoken often to my friends about is that they were all, not my brother I mean, but the rest of them were great storytellers. And they each were very individual in their storytelling, and they invented those stories, except stories which were told by my grandmother, which were more of a mythological nature. Or some stories which were told by my father, which were from, say, the Panchatantra. The rest of them, the stories were totally inventions. And my mother knew some old stories which she would sing. But we will come back to those stories again. Because there were no other children, and because of this very, very sheltered life, where sheltered in the sense we very rarely went out of the house. The house was like a womb. And to the extent that much later, when I was older, we went to a similar house, which was the house of a relative, her baby. And once I was there, I felt uncomfortable because everything looked wrong. The dimensions looked wrong. The proportions looked wrong. Because I was so used to the proportions of this house. It's not that, it was not the size, but it was just how one shape related to another. And there weren't any other children to play with, so we would be left by ourselves, or sometimes my brother would be in one part of the house, I would be in another. But that's something else that we spoke about later, my brother and I, and this is once we had children, that we never felt bored. There was never a moment that we felt bored. In fact, moments got hugely intensified. And when you are by yourself as a child, you look intently at things. And there are quite a few instances which I can narrate, but one thing which I have also spoken to friends about is that at certain time of the day, I should see light rising out of the floor. But I never went to check what it was. I just enjoyed that at a certain time, from a certain part of the floor, that was in the courtyard, that a beam of light shone up. And I don't know after how long, I don't know whether it was a week or just a month, or was it just after 3 days, I do not quite recall. But it was after some time, after a period of time, that I went to explore what it was. And I went close to it. It was just a tiny piece of mirror which was embedded in the floor. That must have been the time the floor was being laid. And I went very close to it, and I saw my own eye in that little glass which was embedded. And such things fascinated me very much. Other things, for instance, this thing sounds a bit cliche, but it was so true as to how enormously, it's true how enormously it has influenced me, was that I used to watch shadows move across the courtyard. But what fascinated me from what the shadow was, that I knew that the shadow was going to reach one alcove of the wall, and reach the next one, then the third one, and the fourth one. But it was going to take a full day for it to reach. So I knew that the shadow moves, but I can't see it moving. That fascinated me. I kept looking at the shadow. If I could discern any movement in it, but I couldn't. But I knew that it moved. So it was that there are things, there are aspects to things which we cannot discern easily, but they have qualities which are hidden in things. I think that's another thing. And then we, for my schooling, we went to the neighboring town. So that's when I was over 5 years old. And I used to return back to the house during harvest season. And it's only then that I explored some rooms which I had never entered. I again remember climbing up a ladder, and there was that was in some deep recesses of the house. And in this dim light, I saw a number of things lying on a kind of a shallow, it was a shortish room inside a room, a small room inside a room. So on the top of this, that would be on the roof of this room, which was inside the house, I saw a number of things lying, all full of dust. And I found what looked like a box. I opened that box. And everything was dirty and grey outside. But when I opened it, I saw that inside it was velvet, red velvet, which was absolutely pristine. And inside the box were beautiful little instruments of all kinds. I found out later that these were instruments for making gun cartridges. So objects have fascinated me, but not as a fetish. There wasn't a desire to keep any one of those long enough. I just looked at them intently, may carry them for a while, but that was it. So when I speak of that old house, so it's not from a sense of nostalgia. And neither do I want to return to that house in any physically to be there. Like there is no great desire to do that. So about the stories, one of my uncles used to enact stories, which he would invent. He would say, for instance, stuff some clothes, towels, and stuff under his shirt, and this would be in the evening, and he would carry a lantern. There was no electricity at the time in the house, and he would carry a lantern, and this lantern would cast a shadow on the wall, and as he walked, his legs would look huge on the wall, and so would his belly, which was stuffed. And he would, there would be certain enactment. For instance, he would be chewing on something and try to, for instance, spit something out of his mouth. But he would say that the lord of the house is so fattened, he can't even spit beyond his tummy, or something to that effect. His stories were always short and brief. And I think those shadows are probably the source of the phantasmagoric images which I use in my videos. Then there were other games. For instance, we would lie where we see this veranda on one side. So this room had, I think, 3 doors, and there were 3 doors behind it. So there was a breeze which would go sort of blow through these, and in the hot summer months, our beds would be laid out between the doors of towards the head of the bed and towards the feet of the bed. And then I remember just waiting for one would sweat, but you waited for one waft of breeze to come, which would cool you. Now, you just waited. You didn't say that, oh, it should come now and cool me off. But you knew that there would be waft breeze coming in, and that would cool you, and it would be extremely pleasant. And you just waited, and it may happen through the course of the afternoon siesta, maybe 5 times, sometimes just twice or once. But I liked that sense of waiting very much, also because that reward of being cooled was so very delicious. That was one. Then in the evening, another game that my uncle would play with. This I call also a game because he just waited for this invisible breeze to flow through the house. If anybody entered through the gate underneath, he would say, and everything was very, very silent as well. The house was on the highest part of the village, so everything was lower. So there were, and everything was a bit further away, so things were very, very quiet. So if anybody walked into the house, he would say, okay, hear the tread, hear the footsteps, and guess who it might be. So from this rhythm of somebody walking, it was guessing that who that person might be. That was another game. There were games of this kind that we played. There are many similar stories, but I think from here on, we will come back to this house, but we must see some images. I thought again I would start with the very first images. Another thing, there were no paintings in the house. There were no, there were books, but there weren't any artworks. And what I did do, I loved to draw. And there was a lot of charcoal and lots of bare walls. And I would draw on the wall. I would draw bicycle, tractor, farm machinery, dancing girls, which I would, we would view in the inner courtyard on some festive occasions when they would arrive, or sometimes they would just come, probably just to ask for some money, and there would be a short performance of dancing. So I would draw them, but I drew all the time. That's another thing, apart from just sitting and watching things, I would draw. And, but I don't know if I drew, I must have drawn like all other children tried, and maybe not particularly better than anyone else, but my parents thought that I was very talented. So I think it was my father who said that when he grows up, we'll send him to an art school. And that was it. My grandmother agreed, everybody said yes. It was, so everybody just has encouraged me in the family from then on, and decided that I was going to be an artist. So I think that has affected in some ways. I think there was no urgency. I think there was nothing also which forms, I think gives birth to another kind of art. Nothing to fight against. There was no struggle at that level. Okay, so I'll go to my first painting, which is, I'm starting from my school days, that college days, that is Chandigarh. This was done in my 4th or 5th year, I think. And yes, then again, apart from one calendar, which I remember, and I also remember the image in that, which was, I think it was a shikara in a lake, and the calendar was painted in a way that the shikara seemed very, very red, in fact shockingly red in this blue, and I remember being extremely uncomfortable looking at it, and I think the calendar, I think years passed, nobody changed that calendar, and it was after a few years that I got reconciled to the idea that it is a shikara or a boat or red color in the blue lake, but this is not how things look like. It can't be that bright, but probably this is how things feel like. I think this is how I must have felt, because I did go to sort of garish colors later on, much later on. But this is using kitsch in a way, and finding some potential in kitsch to speak of complicated, to create sort of, to be able to speak of complex things, I think with a kind of sophisticated kitsch. This was when I did this painting, I was away from home for a period of time. I think I'd gone to Pune, it was the furthest away I'd gone, because Chandigarh was so close to Delhi, it was just like sometimes I would just go home and go next day to the college. And I was on a platform in Kiran, I was all by myself, and there was this push cart, and I remember the smell of the pickles. And I was reminded of my grandmother in the kitchen and the Havelis. I recreated some of those images. And yes, the Haveli also had its ghosts and spirits and strange creatures, which we just imagined. And that's one reason I have put this winding key on the knee of this creature. And the other things from, there's some farm machinery, bottles, these belong to my grandfather who drank himself to death, really. This was done soon after finishing college. It's called Adam's Ills. I think these straight lines and rectangular shapes probably came from being in Chandigarh and seeing an architecture which was different from that of the Haveli. But something which didn't happen for a long time, and still is happening very less, because having lived just inside that Haveli for that long, I didn't paint any landscapes. So everything was an interior. So even this is a public urinal, but it still looks like an interior of some kind. I didn't paint anything which looked like a landscape or looked like that belonging to the external world. Like there too, in the previous one, there's a pushcart, and so I put something inside the pushcart rather than outside it. There's a man he's transparent and he's held in a transparent cube. He's looking a little nervously at the other urinal, and this is and there's a bulb. And which leads to another little box. And there's a floating woman there, and she has a helmet on. I think she can make out. And there's a peeping hole over there. And there are different kinds of instruments for measurement or for scrutiny. And then there are three men who look a bit sheepish on the other side. Yes, this I think too does derive from images which belonged to the architecture of Chandigarh, with some organic shapes in there. This was a drawing done in an art college. There's a man speaking into a mirror, and there's the ear on the mirror, and on the other side is a bladder, which all that he speaks in goes into the bladder and is going to burst at some point. So I think the nature of the events right from my college days to my video works hasn't changed very much, only the means has. This is a drawing, a pencil drawing done soon after college. There's a Sikh man who is bent over a spinning top. And here too, I go rather inwards into, these are not cutouts, this is just one flat piece of paper, but I've made windows within windows inside. And if I was to think as to what really made me draw a Sikh person and a spinning top, the only thing that comes to mind was that the landed people in the feudal families seem to have a sense of the self, of their identity, which they seem to be very protective about. I think that would have been one of the reasons for this drawing. This is a lithograph. There is a man who, with a sort of very ugly body, and he seems aroused. It's called hula hoop, and he's on this mindlessly, moving his hips back and forward on the hula hoop. And there's a girl further away who seems like a minor. She looks pregnant. And there are little stones in the foreground which look like swaddled babies. And there's an agitated sky outside the window. Yeah, this is again done after college, and then I was going to come to Delhi. The interest with light here is that there's no external source of light. I decided to give each object its own light, so it would glow from within, as it were. I think I came to know Majid Bawa then, and one can see that, and we did discuss about color a great deal and about form and so on, and I think there is some influence of those discussions and the proximity with Majid Bawa. There is, that's my uncle. These are not real portraits. I never did real portraits, but like there was this granny-like figure in the first painting, but that's not a portrait of my grandmother. So here too, that's supposed to be me in the middle, being held by this avuncular figure. And that's my father with his hand on my knee. And there's a little bag which is tied up on one side for me to go on my journey to leave Patiala. And there's another woman behind. She stands solidly on the ground with her bare feet. And she stretches her hand out in a protective gesture. This is called The Old Restaurant Gets a New Wing. It's also called the Dhaba painting. This again is from visiting those dhabas in Chandigarh. It seemed strange because in this modern city to have smells which were so close to what was cooked at home where they were home, where at least the Haveli looked so very different. But then there are things which I loved noticing. Like there's this man who is picking his nose. There's another one outside who's squatting on the chair. But the man behind could be taking snuff as well. And there is the waiter who is scratching his crotch. And here too, there are multiple sources of light, not only one source, like the teapots, possibly lit from below. And there's some like extensions made to the dhaba, and there's some signs of a celebration. This is simply called Oops. And there's a man looking at that patterns on his shirt, and there is one freakish pattern that holds his attention. And again, I would think, why would this interest me? I think because I was not thinking of one print, a print being freakish, one of the shapes being different than the rest. But I think I was more thinking of some people in a crowd, one being the outsider, one being different from the rest. I'm looking at this painting after maybe 30 years or longer. And again, you see everything seems enclosed, like in a room. There's a man reaching out to catch a moth. And then where identity sometimes, or there's the man-child which comes in a painting, but there's also gender. This person has ribbons in his hair. And his other hand goes to I was in my 20s then, his other hand goes into to the fly of the trousers. And then there are these intestines and other organs spilling out. Now, this is a painting or a subject which I came back to after 25 to 30, 25, 30 years. This is Man Threading Needle. And usually all the characters are people I've known. Even here too, he was a newspaper guy who used to come to deliver us the newspaper in Patiala. So I asked him to pose for this, to thread a needle. But here, in my later video work, Man Threading a Needle, that does acquire greater complexity here, with the spout of this hand pump split open from below. I think its sexual imagery here and relating it to threading of the needle is more obvious. So I do go back to my earlier work, and this too is also how I relate in time to things which I've done. It doesn't feel like as if I'm going back. Those are things which are with me, and I pull them out anytime that I want to. It's not as if I'm pulling them out from any past. This painting was called Rain, and this was again during the time of the I think that one of the reasons there's a man lying in the foreground. He seems to be sick, ill, or he could be dying, and there is rain which revives. The symbol of water as reviving life. And then there is a landscape which is burning, which also fire destroys, but also it gives birth to something new. You see what looks like a boat behind the man lying in the foreground is top of a turban. And if one can make out, he's holding with his hand a basket which is full of glassware, something fragile, and he seems to be on the edge of some precipice. There is water just below him. This was during the just after the anti-Sikh riots. But this is not illustrative of that. I've not ever worked like that, but there are events and so on stay in my head, and somehow they creep into my imaginary world. This is a very tiny painting. The inside of it is just 3 inches. That's me, and those are the mirrors. Mirrors have and reflections have again interested me, and also going back to the stories which were told in the Haveli. One of my uncles used to tell. He told only one story. So in the evening he would say, "Okay, where was I?" So my brother and I would tell him. So he would wait for a few seconds and start on the story. So they were like different episodes, as it were, but they never ended. And we listened to it for many years, but there was no end to the story. But one day we did ask him. We thought we'd ask him what the story is called. So he was taken aback. He wasn't expecting us to ask him. So he said it's called A Mountain of Mirrors. So it struck us that what he did when he asked us, where was I? It was he inserted that last image into a mirror and saw its reflection in another, and this is how he started on. So these were stories with endless reflections and transforming a little with every reflection. This I did at the Royal College of Art. It's called the Conjurer. Here the Conjurer is making fire, but as we can see, it's painted fire. There is a hand which is holding up a sheet of cloth behind him. So and this too in my painting and later in my video works as well is this theatricality. I set up kind of a tableau, and this also helps me to say that this is not any chunk of reality which I bring from outside and deposit it, but this is just an artifact. This is my invention. So it both relates to my own practice, and then it relates also to those who are able to deceive us with their guiles. This is again called Conjurer 2, or Promise of Escape. It just has a sheet over his back which looks like water, and then there's a painted boat behind him. This was also done in London. This was after a visit to Italy, so one can see the body type and kind of the nature of the drawing, which is influenced by it. So by Italian painters. It is called Fish Dreaming of Its Holy Captors. These are all quite large. This would be 9 or 10 feet in height. This is called Bequests of Golden Sands and Sorrow. This too, not directly related, but if I think of it, it also happened after the army entered the Golden Temple. And there's one can make out in the painting, there's a man who is carrying a horse, a mutilated horse. You can see the back of the horse on the side. And a child who sits in a circle of fire holds onto a boat which is full of water. And a woman is trying to prop up the head of a horse. I decided to do a series of paintings which I thought I would do several of them, and then they would come together in one large painting. It's simply called Cockerel 2, and this is the man-child I was referring to, and was chasing again the androgynous figure. So my space of comfort seems to be where things are not clearly defined one way or the other, but there's the stay in this gray space, which is for me like a space of fecundity and potential. From the same set, and Dreaming Hunter. Again, that man-child helping this matronly figure cut a piece of cloth. And there's a man riding on the back of a peacock. And the peacock is looking at a reflection in a pool, in a cloud. This is again called Family 2. This is called of a teapot and other vessels. This is called the storyteller. And so this is where all those paintings have come together. It's still sort of unfinished, this painting. So I hope to finish it at some point. But it's with a collector. But there is this agreement with him that I may take it back, borrow it for some time from him to finish it off. In the foreground, we see some bricks and a trowel, which masons use. Now, this again going back to the storytellers. They were the village raconteurs who would narrate various stories. But then there was also this mason who used to, he always had some work in the house. And after sunset at night, he would tell me and my brother, and we were very little, of course, at the time, he would tell us erotic stories. And they were very, very strange erotic stories. I think some of those have come in here. I did a series of heads, portraits, and the attempt was if I could, they're not portrait of any particular person, but where, again, I wanted the heads to seem that there is something going on in the heads of these characters, that they're thinking of something. And they could be thinking of, they would appear to be thinking of one thing, then suddenly they would appear, to me at least, that they're thinking of something else. So their position itself is unstable. But then I wanted to counter it with a composition which is classically contained, as it were. So to give it a solid base, but then to destabilize it at a psychological level. And this is, one can see when I was speaking of my interest in kitsch and in calendar and how I employ it. This is a detail of a large, not that very large work. It's just called The Foreign Wife. This again the portrait of somebody whose gender is not clearly defined. Yeah, then I was also interested in how light behaves on a canvas, or how it bounces off brushwork. So this was done with very, very tiny brush strokes, but it took very long to work on this. I was taking, even the earlier paintings, some of them took one year to 2 years. But why paintings took that long is not that they physically took that long, but for me they didn't quite seem right. For instance, I would move one object to maybe 2 centimeters to the right or 1 millimeter to the left, and then it appeared right. And so there was a moment in a configuration when, to me, it would appear that yes, now the work, there's a kind of tension is released in some sense from my body, and the painting begins to sing, as it were. And also, as I spoke of looking at little things for very long, I do insert some tiny little details in the larger work. Here there is which looks like a lake or a pond, and there are three characters. They seem to be, two of them seem to be quarreling, and they're having dinner, it seems, and part of it seems to be flowing into the water. And one man seems to have gotten away and shedding his clothes. There was a little set which was just done really as menu covers. This is, again, I can't probably make it out very clearly. There's a man in the tree. There was a story I read a long time ago of a man who, of a feudal lord, who was fed up with the kind of life he led and decided to, left everything and went to live up on the tree for the rest of his life. This is a mixed media work, small, woman pierced by moons. This is Rati and Kama. This is the time when Shiva was in deep meditation. And I like that passage where Rati and Kama go to arouse him from his meditation, because the whole earth was turning barren. But as they walked through the forest, the flowers bloomed and the animals began to frolic. This is, again, it has some tiny figures. One can't make out. They are, it's called white shadows. They are in the background, and they seem to be migrating. They seem to be leaving in droves. It's about 11 feet, the painting, 13 feet in fact. It's man with a torch. So there is this waiting or anticipation of something or searching, which again is carried, this mood, by most of my characters. This is on shaped wood. Man with Buddha. So this is a slightly better idea of what it looks like. So these are some experiments with extending the painting from its flatness to another dimension. This is, it has quite a few titles to it, but how this painting came to me, apart from numerous stories which I'd heard about long beards as a child, was that after the attack on those towers in America, when I was to travel there, I had to go to London first, then to America. I was told by my flight agent that anybody with beard is really hassled at the airport. So I could be. So she advised me to shave my beard off. But also it refers to, again, during those anti-Sikh riots, there were people who were cutting their beards off and somehow changing their identities, physically at least. This is, I think, called delusional paradise and ochre dust. So further away, there are tanks which are approaching, and there's dust rising for those tanks. They're coming towards this paradise. It's called Boy Without Reflection. So we have this. This is quite a large painting. Again, it's I think 10 feet something. Now, we see these dogs which are unleashed by this man-child again, who has no reflection. So I'm playing on the word reflection as in thinking, so, unthinking, as or without any reflection. And there are destroyed buildings, which are in small detail. There's destroyed bridges, there's fire, there's a family of lizards which is trying to escape. And there are broken nests which are flying out of the air. So this is a triptych, but it's a freestanding triptych. So it stands on the floor. The painting on the left is the one closest to us, then one in the middle is the furthest away, and then there is the one on the right. It's called Reading Man, and then there are wire sculptures of there's a man who's in a chair reading, there's one reclining person reading, there's a standing man on the right side. This is again my interest in theatre, as I said, or theatricality, and in cinema as well. There is so you have to actually to see the painting properly. You have to walk from one side to the other because bits of it are always hidden. So you can't scan it from one standing position. It unfolds. It again covers maybe about 15 feet of floor space. This is a pencil drawing with this artist who stands on this edge, looking at the other side. So he's carrying the scrolls, and on top of the trees, possibly his muse, and behind him are his memories, but also art history that one carries with oneself. Donkeys appear in later work as well as a watercolor. So I thought I would show some watercolor works, which I did. This called Fisher. Paint all around and let the images of figures emerge from the space which was initially just unpainted. And restless to appear quite often in the work. This is two wrestlers in a forest. They're restless again. They're a set of. They look like miniature paintings. They're not. They're sort of inspired by miniature works of women wrestling with lions. So the lion in Punjab is always. Man is referred to as lion, and there's this macho culture. But here we see that the woman seems to be in a winning position every time. So I have sort of framed them in more sort of modernist shapes, and these are on cardboards, like we're on packing cardboards, which can. So to play with kind of as a counterfoil to this traditional way of painting. This one close up, one of those. A small set of people arguing, or this is one is a set of this was a set of teacups I had done, about 15, 20 of them. These are men making teacups. This is a sculpture called Ouroboros, which is the ancient symbol of a serpent swallowing its tail. The little girl is not part of the sculpture. This is just digitally placed there to show the scale of the work. Here, this man has a torch and he lights it up to light up the path. But all he manages to do is light the back of his own horse. And so if you look at the body of the man, it is merged into the body of the horse. So this is also to say, in a way, that what I'm talking about is not the horse. It's not about the horse. It's not about the rider. But I'm trying to talk of other things. And it's in three different parts. And if one looks carefully, it's a work which I have not yet made, but I have sort of digitally worked on it. This is, again, as I was saying about donkeys, which I've seen since my childhood. And my uncle used to say that and tell me that how intelligent they were. And there were various stories which was spun around the donkeys and their intelligence. And also how they helped build civilizations. And how they've been treated so badly. So this is like an itinerant salesman who's carrying these fluorescent tubes on his back, and as he goes from this was in my head, as he goes from one town to another, he sees a horse who is profusely leaking water. So it was as if a moment of epiphany. He falls on his heels to maybe apologize to him for what humans have done to or who treated donkeys. These were sets of a set of large photographs, again staged photographs, called family pictures. And again, there is the man with the spinning top. There's family picture too. This is called The Lion and the Milk Bowl. Yeah, I was in some town and I was just taking pictures, and there was an open door. So, and I photographed this courtyard, so I thought I would create a little story inside the courtyard. So this woman could be trying to pacify the lion or beckoning the lion, but again, the men, as in the previous one, seems to have run away. Only the woman is the one who stays back. This is called Conference of Birds. During the Commonwealth Games, quite a few galleries were invited to send works based on Delhi or the Games, and we were expected to do laudatory work. But here I've made these birds and little creatures, and the small insects there as well, all congregating to see what's happening to their city. And there's a Tower of Babel, unfinished. This hubris of what you were told, all these people, what the games would be and how they would be the best ever, and how the infrastructure would be the best ever. And we see further away, a half-broken flyover. This is a set of two called Untested Desires. There were a group of people who could be trying to escape somebody, or they're trying to chase someone, or they could be just playing adult games. And these two are supposed to be seen together, and the same people are on the edge. Again, they could be migrants, immigrants to another place. They seem to be on a border. We see this road at the far end, and then we see migratory birds. Few of them are dead on their flight. This is a work which is still unfinished. It's called Long Sleep of the Storyteller. So it is from this figure is a slightly androgynous figure, is carrying this body, limp body from this landscape which seems to be a fantastical landscape with white unicorn, carrying this sleeping storyteller to the world of today. Yeah, this is the man threading needle coming back. So in 1999, I made the first work of where I projected video onto my paintings. But this had, I was working on this in my head for many years. For about 5-6 years before finally making the first work. Now, we had in my hometown, we had started in Patiala a film club, a film society, where we were on the national circuit of the Indian Film Society. So we used to get all those films which were on the circuit. But also we were getting films from embassies. So we saw some great cinema which we would project on the garage door of the house. And so I was very drawn to cinema. Found it a very powerful medium. And then painting has interested me always. So I wondered if I could bring both of them together. And I saw that it seemed to offer me with a tool where I could enter spaces of experience which I couldn't have entered alone with painting alone or with video alone. So after Man Threading Needle, this is the second work which I made, so where I revisited the work, and this is called He Was a Good Man. So I thought it would be interesting to deconstruct the work, even as I gel with exact superimposition, the painted image and the videoed image, that I could show that this is on a flat surface and it's just a painting underneath. So it doesn't look like a trick work, but it does look very much like, as I said, an artifact. These are projected shadows on the painting. I would emphasize the flatness of the canvas. This man with Cockerel, where the Cockerel escapes from the man's hand, and as it escapes, he loses his reflection. He regains it, but loses it again. So it's a cycle. So the loop itself in the video is meaningful. It adds to what the work is about. This is called Windows, and I constructed a kind of cart for it, and it was. I do like showing it in a tent. So in various places, different kinds of tents were constructed. So this is looks like a puppet show. So the windows open and close, and there's a narration, a story which unfolds. This is called the pink room or the powder room, and was first made. It was constructed at a petrol station on the motorway. So as you entered, and this was near a small little eating place, so you would go in there there were truckers and others who would come to the petrol station. You went in to wash your hands, and as you looked in the mirror, you saw that your reflection would disappear and other faces appeared in your place. And I tried to work it out in a manner where there'll be no retinal shift. There'll be the image formed behind the mirror would be at the same distance as your own reflection. This is called Man in Water. There is a sculptural shape in water. It's like a little hill or a mountain, and this monk-like figure is projected onto it. In the background, there's a continuous stream of traffic, and there are transformations that this man goes into. There are some books, flying books and burning books, which pass through the body of this man, and a cave appears in this hill-like, mound-like shape. And then there are various transformations, and it ends with children playing and their laughter, and it turns into a mountain of gold. Yeah, this is the large work, Crossings. It was originally called Crossings 2 Stories. So I'll see how I can describe this work. Now, maybe before this I could talk of another memory. And this is the first work with multiple projections, with a 4-channel projection that I did. There's, in some ways it may be connected to what I've done in this work. My mother's village was a village which didn't have any streets. So people went from and visited each other's house over the rooftops. Or there would be very tiny little doors on the roofs separating one house from the other. But all the houses had courtyards, and everybody was related to each other. So during weddings, there a group of women or one woman would come up in the courtyard and sing. But that song was addressed at other women in other houses. So another of those women would leave whatever they were doing and they would come into the courtyard, and one of them or two of them would reply in song to this woman. And then this woman would reply back. And then from a third courtyard, another woman would come in. And so there would be 2 women or 6 women. And there's another way of singing. They would join their heads together, usually. Usually it wasn't one woman. Usually there would be 2, but sometimes there would be 1 as well. So they would join their heads together and sing. And they joined their heads because with the vibration, they could synchronize their voices. So there would be one moment where there would be all maybe 5 courtyards singing together. And so they were separate from each other. They didn't see each other, but they were both connected in song. So here, in the first image on the left, we see a group of, it's like a family, they may relate, or just a group who may not be exactly related, but somehow they've come together. First, we see them on the roadside, and they have a bundle of clothes. So, there's only one bag they have, so it seems that it has been hastily put together, or they've hastily left wherever they were. So they are made homeless in certain circumstances. In another place where they find themselves, we see background littered with torn clothes. So that could have been some sign of some violence. So their crossing would be away from what was their homestead, or what their whatever they would have called home. They are constantly in a shifting landscape. The second one painting shows a man sitting with birds. This was a story narrated to me that somebody who had actually seen it, but then I've read about it as well. That in this 70s, 80s, and that's when there were lots of hippies around, Indian hippies as well as those coming from Europe and America. In Old Delhi, my friend saw a person selling very colorful little birds. And so he was told later, and these hippies would buy those birds. So as they took the birds home, after a few days the color would wash off. They were just ordinary sparrows which were painted. So this was crossing as in transformation, as dressing up, as altering your own self in some ways. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. And the third is these people standing on the edge of a landscape, of a boundary of some kind. And they are constantly shifting, and they're looking out into the distance. So, and looking into the distance is always would mean expectation of some kind, or waiting for something. So that's a kind of, or this could be a boundary of a geographical boundary. maybe of another land, of a political boundary. But I do see it as also a psychological edge of this, their inability to move forward. Some of them do leave their painted bodies and visit other canvases, but they come back, and so they can't quite go anywhere from the position where they are. And the last one sort of anchors them in a way. For me, this man looking into empty space. And from time to time, he lifts up this hammer, strikes the empty space where a white horse appears. So that white horse too begins to vanish, disappear as soon as it appears. So he has to again strike the air with the hammer. For me, this is a mental effort, a combination of a mental effort and physical effort for the crossings which one has to make. And so there are, I call it two stories. So these are one kind of crossing, and then I inserted in a kind of a narrative, which is a little open-ended, but there's a string which does hold it together, I believe. The second set of events begins to take place when this boy, which we see now, releases from his hand something which looks like a tornado. And those tornadoes begin to multiply and cover all the four canvases. Now, as they sweep across the four canvases, what happens is that the video images, which were gelled, superimposed, gelled with the painted image, so they no longer are gelled. So we are left with more or less random projections over the paintings. And the narrative built there is of a Sikh man who is tying a turban on his son, on a younger boy. And then again, further on in the sequence, we see this older person offering different turbans, colored turbans, to another young boy who he shows him different colored turbans, but he shakes his head each time, doesn't want any of those. And then there we see that the scene has shifted to another place, another country. I shot the other bit in California. So we see again the same person, the older person who was tying turban on the younger one, and another person who is still older. And there's a little child who looks at these two older people. These older people are rolling a turban, preparing it to put on the child. And the child runs under the turban and runs into the mountains, into the landscape. But we see these the two older people not quite distressed that much with the young boy's refusal, but they just smile at each other. They were just installed in different ways. And this is again a four-channel video installation. From my home in Patiala, I could see further away railway line and a small tiny station where there were families coming from other states, usually Bihar. They would be coming there to find work. And there were stories of them disappearing, of some children being lost, and so on. So this is like life-size train which passes through, and we see there's a painted figures, and they seem to disappear one by one. This is work which was started quite some time ago, a few years ago, but recently finished because it needed a musical component to it. It shows a clearing in the forest. And in the beginning, we see a man who flagellates himself on a patch of burnt ground. And then we see the shelves with books, which get destroyed. Some books are then saved from the embers. And slowly we see that where the charred ground was, through various interventions, a city comes to life. There are two paintings on the left and the right. It's a man who, the same person repeated in both the canvases, with slight differences. And he continuously eats, but from time to time there's some turbulence in the room, and at that point he leaves his painted body and enters the middle space where he continuously wrestles. And as both of them wrestle, they change their gender, or they change their class, sometimes they're dressed, sometimes they're naked. And I treat the wall differently. Sometimes it's charred and burnt, another time it's a carpet, protection on the carpet. Sometimes it's a landscape made in clay. This is the work which is still unfinished. It's called Shadows of the Mind. A person walks around reading a book, and when he has his back to one of the pedestals, on one of them a house of cards is formed, and that's there we see. And in the other one, there's a fishbowl, but it's never formed when he's looking at them. It's only formed when he's not looking at it. And they both appear once he's in control of his agitated mind and sits down to read, and is not pacing. But it's an unfinished work. Now there's documentation of my show, which was at World Gallery. So that will give a little better idea of the painted image and the moving image, so how they come together. It's a So I had done a workshop with the with dancers and wrestlers for this video, and because they both of them treat the body differently. There's different sort of way you receive a push, when the wrestler receives a push, or how he pushes the other, and how a dancer negotiates the body of the other. So at times they seem aggressive, and other times there's an erotic, sensuous feel to their encounters. I extracted one of the channels from crossings and made an independent piece. just a smallish version of the original, which was which is about 45 feet in length. So I block out the video projection, and then we see the flat painting. But then this hand also allows to create small little chapters and the journey of the cattle. But I also thought of it as initially when I was showing it still happens that people watching the videos, they try to stop the light of the projector to see what was on the canvas. So I thought I would do it for the audience in the video itself. This is the last one.
He was a good man. He was a good man.
We actually don't have time left for questions and answers. We can take them forward to the reception area. Thank you.